In Granada, the authorities did not begin by taking houses. They began by taking names. In the winter of 1609, 40 Morisco families were ordered to surrender the last evidence of who they had been before conversion, surveillance, and expulsion. One woman understood what the decree was designed to accomplish. So while officials prepared to erase her people from the record, she began hiding their true names beneath the city. The order was read in a public square on the edge of Granada. Royal officers arrived before sunrise. They blocked the narrow streets leading into the Morisco quarter and placed armed guards at every exit. No one was told why the entire adult population had been summoned. They were simply ordered to stand in rows and wait to be identified. A clerk sat behind a wooden table with a register opened in front of him. He did not ask the residents for their names. He read the names already assigned to them. Mateo Herrera. A bookbinder stepped forward. Isabel de Cordoba. A woman in a worn brown mantle raised her hand. That woman was 47 years old. The archive called her Isabel. Her family called her Zahra al-Qurtubi. The difference was not ceremonial. It was evidence of a system. For decades, Morisco families had been forced to live under Christian names recorded by priests, tax collectors, property officials, and local courts. Arabic names survived only inside homes, in private letters, in whispered prayers, and in the memories of people who understood that speaking too freely could invite investigation. The officers in the square knew this. They used it deliberately. An elderly metal worker stood near the back of the crowd. The clerk called his registered name twice. The man did not move. Either he failed to hear it, or no longer recognized it as his own. A soldier approached him. Then, with a mocking smile, the soldier shouted the man's Arabic name. The reaction was immediate. The metal worker lifted his head. The square went silent. That single movement exposed what the authorities had spent years trying to deny. The official name had been accepted under pressure. The forbidden name still reached the man faster. Zahra saw the soldier laugh. She also saw the clerk make a mark beside the man's entry. The gathering was not a routine census. It was an examination. The officers were measuring which identities remained alive. Captain Alonso Varela arrived after the registration had begun. He was not dressed for battle. He carried no visible weapon. His authority came from sealed orders, clerks, guards, and lists. Varela had been assigned to supervise the removal of Morisco families from the district. He spoke in administrative language. He did not call the operation punishment. He called it transfer. He did not describe the seizure of homes as theft. He called it reassignment of property. This made the process more dangerous, not less. A crime committed in anger may leave witnesses. A crime processed through offices leaves receipts. Varela stood before the assembled residents and informed them that their households were to be inspected. All Arabic manuscripts were to be surrendered. All private marriage records were to be surrendered. All family genealogies, letters, seals, devotional texts, property agreements, and handwritten histories were to be surrendered. The officers claimed these materials required examination. No one in the square believed they would be returned. Then Varela announced the second order. The Morisco residents of the district would be removed from Granada. They would be given 10 days to prepare. The announcement produced no immediate outcry. Public protest would have given the guards an excuse to make arrests. The crowd remained still, but the consequences were already clear. Families would lose their homes, craftsmen would lose their workshops, widows would lose inherited property. Men and women who had lived their entire lives in Granada would be forced toward ports they had never seen, then placed on ships under armed supervision. But Zahra understood that the authorities were planning another form of confiscation. They intended to take the evidence first. Once the family records were gone, property could be seized without meaningful challenge. Once the Arabic names disappeared, ancestry could be denied. Once the letters and genealogies were destroyed, the expelled population would become easier to describe as outsiders who had never truly belonged to the city. This was not merely removal, it was preparation for historical denial. The officers dismissed the crowd in groups. Each household received a number and an inspection date. Guards remained at the street entrances. Zahra returned home with her husband. The archive knew him as Mateo Herrera. His real name was Yusuf ibn Harun. Yusuf repaired bindings and copied damaged pages for merchants, priests, and private collectors. He had spent years learning how to hide Arabic writing inside books that officials considered harmless. A devotional page could be placed beneath a Latin cover. A family record could be stitched inside a spine. A name could survive because an inspector did not think to cut through the binding. That evening, Yusuf closed the shutters before speaking. The coastal orders have already reached the city. Zahra remained standing. How long? 10 days at most. Varela said 10. He may move sooner. Yusuf placed a folded notice on the table. It had passed through the hands of another copyist before reaching him. The text listed inspection procedures, confiscation rules, transport groups, and the number of guards required for each column of deportees. The order had been prepared before the people in the square were informed. Their fate had already been organized. Zahra read the notice twice. The document listed households under Christian names only. Several were misspelled. Some families were identified by property number rather than surname. One man was listed as the occupant of a house that had belonged to his family for more than a century, but nothing in the record acknowledged who his parents had been or where his grandparents were buried. The archive had already reduced them. The next stage would complete the work. Zahra asked Yusuf how many family histories were still hidden in the quarter. Not many. How many can survive a full search? None, if they search properly. That answer ended the discussion. Zahra had worked for years repairing stone floors and ceramic surfaces in old buildings across Granada. Before restrictions tightened, she had been permitted to enter houses, courtyards, cisterns, and abandoned bathhouses. She knew which structures had sealed rooms. She knew which floors had been repaired badly. She knew where older stone remained beneath newer plaster. Most importantly, she knew of a ruined hammam near the edge of the old quarter. The bathhouse had been abandoned after its water channels failed. Officials had stripped away its doors and fittings. Part of the roof had collapsed. The building was considered useless. No one guarded it. The central chamber still contained rows of thick floor stones. Zahra had repaired several of them years earlier. She knew they could be lifted without breaking if pressure was applied at the correct edge. A document could be discovered. A stone floor would be ignored. That night, Zahra entered the bathhouse carrying a small iron chisel, a mallet wrapped in cloth, and an oil lamp shielded on 3 sides. She worked without Yusuf. If she were followed, only one of them should be exposed. The chamber smelled of dust and stagnant water. Sections of the tiled walls had fallen away. The old drainage channel was blocked with rubble. Zahra knelt beside the first loose stone. She inserted the chisel into the seam, pressed downward, and raised the slab just high enough to grip it with both hands. Then she turned it over. The upper surface was worn smooth by generations of footsteps. The underside had never been seen. Zahra began to carve. Not the Christian name from the register, the real one. She cut each letter slowly to avoid noise. The stone resisted. Her hands began to bleed where the chisel rubbed against her fingers, but she did not stop. When the first name was complete, she added the name of the family's former village and the trade they had carried into Granada. Then she returned the stone to its place with the inscription facing downward. By midnight, 3 family names had been buried beneath the chamber floor. The next evening, Zahra visited the home of an elderly textile worker. He lived with 2 adult relatives and had preserved his family's Arabic name for decades without writing it down. Zahra told him she intended to record it. He stepped away from her. For whom? For those who come after us. There may be no one after us. Then the city will keep it. The man studied her face. He had seen neighbors arrested after private conversations. He knew that informants sometimes belonged to the same families they betrayed. The authorities did not need many. They needed only one frightened person, one debt, one promise of protection. "You are collecting names," he said. "Yes." "That is what they are doing. They are collecting the names they gave us. And you want the others. I want the ones they intend to destroy." He refused. Zahra did not argue further. She told him to follow her if he changed his mind. Hours later, footsteps entered the ruined bathhouse behind her. The textile worker stood in the doorway. Zahra lifted one of the stones and turned it toward him. 3 Arabic names had been cut into the hidden surface. The man touched the first inscription with 2 fingers. Only then did he give Zahra his true name. If you're listening from a place where families have been forced to change their names, leave their homeland, or hide their faith to survive, tell us where you are in the comments. Write your city, your country, or the land your family still remembers. Let the names that history tried to silence be spoken again. The textile worker gave his name only once. Zahra repeated it carefully, then asked for the names of his parents, the village his family had left before coming to Granada, and the trade by which they had survived. He answered in fragments, not because he had forgotten, but because each fact had become dangerous. Zahra carved the information into the underside of a separate stone. She kept the inscription brief. A name, a parentage, a place, a craft, enough to establish that a family had existed before the authorities renamed it. The man watched her lower the stone back into position. When the slab settled into the floor, the evidence disappeared. That was the strength of the plan. An archive could be searched, a home could be emptied, a person could be forced to speak. But the soldiers preparing the expulsion had no reason to dismantle a dead bathhouse 1 stone at a time. The following night, the textile worker returned with 2 other adults. One was a former water carrier whose knees had been damaged after decades on Granada's steep streets. The other was a woman who made soap and had preserved her mother's family name without ever writing it down. Zahra admitted them separately. No one was permitted to remain while another household spoke. The rule was not based on mistrust. It was based on survival. If one person were arrested, that person should not be able to identify every name or every witness. Each visitor entered through a broken service passage behind the bathhouse, each left by a different route. Yusuf monitored the nearby streets from a distance. He never stood at the entrance. He remained in the shadows of an abandoned workshop, listening for patrols and counting the minutes between arrivals. The operation was small, disciplined, and almost silent. That was how persecuted communities preserved themselves, not through grand declarations, but through procedures designed around the certainty of surveillance. By the 4th night, Zahra had recorded 11 families. The work became harder. Some names were spoken with confidence, others had survived only in pieces. A leather worker remembered his grandfather's first name, but not the village where he had been born. A widow knew the family name used inside her home, but could not say whether it had belonged to her father's line or her mother's. One man gave Zahra 3 different versions of the same surname. "Which one is true?" she asked. All of them were used. She chose the oldest form he could remember. The authorities had created a system in which uncertainty itself became a weapon. First, a name was prohibited, then its spelling was altered, then the altered form was entered into a Christian register. After enough years, officials could claim that the original identity had never existed. Zahra refused to resolve every contradiction. She carved the uncertainty into the stone. One name appeared in two forms, divided by a line. Another was followed by the words, "remembered through the mother." She was not constructing a perfect genealogy. She was preserving evidence of damage. On the fifth night, a former mason arrived carrying a wrapped object beneath his coat. Zahra stopped him before he entered the central chamber. "No possessions. It belongs with the name." He unwrapped a small ceramic fragment painted with a faded blue pattern. It had come from a house demolished years earlier. His family had kept it because the design had been made by one of his ancestors. Zahra refused to bury it. Objects could shift beneath the stones. They could create gaps. They could be discovered. The mason tightened his grip. "If the name survives without this, no one will know what we made." Zahra looked at the fragment, then at the floor. She took the piece from him and used its pattern as the border around his family's inscription. The object itself left with him. That decision changed the memorial. Until then, the stones had contained only letters. Afterward, Zahra began adding small identifying marks around certain names: a weaving pattern, a tool shape, a water channel, a seed, a geometric border remembered from a family workshop. The marks had no religious purpose. They recorded labor. The people marked for removal had built, repaired, carried, dyed, cut, fired, planted, and bound much of what Granada used every day. The city intended to take their property while denying their contribution. The stones would contradict that denial. By the sixth night, the number had risen to 23. The work was taking a physical toll. Zahra's fingers had swollen. Dust settled into the cuts on her hands. Her shoulders stiffened from lifting the slabs. She began using a leather strip around the chisel to reduce the impact against her palm. Yusuf urged her to stop before dawn. She refused. "They may search tomorrow. They may search tonight. Then we finish before they arrive." This was not courage in the simple sense. Zahra understood the risk. She continued because the alternative was measurable. If she stopped, 17 families would remain only in the memories of people about to be dispersed. The authorities relied on exhaustion. They expected fear to make preservation impossible. Zahra treated exhaustion as another obstacle to be managed. She changed the order of the work. Yusuf began preparing each stone by loosening the mortar before the visitors arrived. Zahra carved while the next person waited in a side chamber. The completed slab was returned immediately, and the dust was swept into the blocked drainage channel. Nothing remained visible. Not a tool, not a lamp mark, not a fresh pile of stone powder. On the seventh night, conflict entered the bathhouse. 2 men arrived at the same time, each claiming to represent the same extended family. They disagreed over the true surname. The dispute had begun years earlier after one branch accepted a new Christian name more fully than the other. Now, under the threat of expulsion, the argument had become more severe. One accused the other of abandoning the family. The other accused him of risking everyone by preserving a prohibited name. Their voices rose. Zahra extinguished the lamp. The chamber fell into darkness. Neither man spoke again. Outside, footsteps passed along the street. A patrol stopped near the ruined entrance. Yusuf moved away from the workshop and deliberately crossed the far end of the lane. One of the guards called after him. He did not run. Running would have redirected the patrol toward the bathhouse. He allowed himself to be questioned. He gave his Christian name, stated his profession, and claimed he was returning from a delivery. The patrol searched his coat and found nothing. Inside the bathhouse, Zahra remained motionless with the 2 men beside her. The guard stood less than 30 paces away. One of them looked toward the collapsed doorway. Another complained about the smell of stagnant water. They moved on. Only when the street was silent again did Zahra relight the lamp. She faced the two men. "If you want your disagreement remembered, I will carve both names." Neither objected. She placed the branches beneath a single family mark and cut a dividing line between them. The stone preserved the conflict without allowing it to destroy the record. By the 8th night, 35 families had been buried beneath the floor. Word had spread more widely than Zahra intended. Adults began arriving without invitation. Some had traveled from other streets after curfew. Others had been sent by relatives too ill or too closely watched to come themselves. Zahra turned several away. The bathhouse could hold only so much evidence without changing the floor enough to attract suspicion. She had chosen 40 because the central chamber contained 40 stones she could lift and replace without damage. The limit was brutal. Every person outside the plan had a name worth preserving. But attempting to save everyone could expose those already recorded. Persecution forced victims into choices that later generations could mistake for indifference. In reality, the decisions were made under pressure created by the authorities themselves. On the 9th night, the final households arrived. The 39th name belonged to a midwife who had delivered generations of adults in the quarter and had kept no record of her work. Zahra carved her name beside a small open hand. The 40th representative did not appear. Yusuf waited near the outer passage. The hour passed. Then another. Zahra began preparing the last stone anyway. Before dawn, a man entered alone. His face was covered, and he refused to remove the cloth. He gave the missing family's true name, but would not explain why its chosen representative had not come. Zahra asked how he knew the details. "I was sent." "By whom?" He did not answer. She should have refused him. Instead, she tested him with a fact only the family would know: the location of their former workshop before it was confiscated. He answered correctly. Zahra carved the name. When she looked up, the man was watching the floor rather than the inscription. He left before the stone was replaced. Yusuf entered moments later. "Do you know him?" "No." They returned the final slab to its position. 40 family records now lay beneath the chamber. But as Zahra swept the last dust toward the drain, she noticed a mark near the entrance, a wet footprint. It did not belong to Yusuf. It had come from the old water passage behind the wall. Someone had entered the bathhouse before the final visitor arrived. Someone had been close enough to hear the chisel striking stone. And that person had left without giving a name. The searches began before the district was ready. At first light, soldiers entered 3 streets at once. Doors were forced open. Workrooms were emptied. Storage jars were broken and inspected. Floorboards were lifted where officials suspected hidden writing. The operation was not improvised. Each patrol carried household numbers, names, and instructions. They knew which residents copied texts, which families had once owned Arabic books, and which craftsmen possessed tools capable of concealing documents inside walls, furniture, or bindings. Someone had prepared the list. Zahra saw the first arrest from her doorway. A spice merchant was taken outside, while 2 clerks searched his shelves. They found no manuscript, but one officer discovered Arabic lettering carved into the underside of a wooden weight. The object had belonged to the merchant's father. That was enough. The man was removed. His shop was sealed. The search then moved to the next house. Yusuf understood what would happen when the patrol reached them. He took the small manuscript containing the 40 names and carried it into his workroom. There was no time to move it through the streets. No safe house remained outside suspicion. He opened a Latin prayer book, waiting for repair. The spine had already been removed. He placed the folded Arabic pages behind the inner binding, covered them with cloth, and fixed the leather back into position. It was a method he had used before, but the officials searching the district were no longer looking only for visible books. They were looking for technique. Zahra entered the room. "You should burn it." Yusuf continued pressing the leather into place. "No. The stones are complete. The order is not." The manuscript contained more than names. It recorded which stone held each family, which identifying mark surrounded the inscription, and where the genuine sequence began. Without it, Zahra could still identify much of the floor from memory, but if she were arrested, the arrangement might become impossible to reconstruct. Yusuf closed the book. He did not defend the decision further. The soldiers reached their house before noon. Captain Alonso Varela did not enter with them. He remained outside while a sergeant directed the search. That distance was deliberate. Officials like Varela rarely needed to touch what they confiscated. They designed the process and allowed others to perform it. The search began with the obvious places. The bed frame was dismantled, clothing was shaken out, the cooking hearth was opened. Clay vessels were emptied onto the floor. Then the patrol entered Yusuf's workroom. The sergeant examined the unfinished books one by one. He turned pages backward. He pressed his thumb along the spines. He smelled the glue and checked for sections that had been resealed recently. Yusuf stood against the wall. Zahra remained in the doorway. A soldier lifted the Latin prayer book. The leather had not dried fully. He handed it to the sergeant. The sergeant bent the cover and heard the faint crack of fresh adhesive. He drew a knife, inserted it beneath the inner lining, and cut through the binding. The folded manuscript fell onto the table. No one spoke. The Arabic writing was immediately visible. The sergeant unfolded the first page. He could not read it, but he recognized repeated names and symbols. He looked at Yusuf. "What is this?" "A repair note." The answer was weak by design. Yusuf was not trying to convince them. He was placing responsibility on himself before Zahra could be questioned. The sergeant struck the table with the flat of his hand. "These are names." Yusuf said nothing. A clerk was called inside. He read enough Arabic to identify family lines, locations, and marks. The room changed at once. The officers stopped searching for hidden devotional writing. They began searching for a network. Yusuf was bound at the wrists. Zahra moved forward, but he looked directly at her. Not at the manuscript, not at the soldiers, at her. The warning was clear. "Do not explain." The sergeant asked who had dictated the names. Yusuf answered, "I collected them." "For what purpose?" "To remember them." "Where is the complete record?" "This is complete." It was a lie. The manuscript contained the sequence, but the actual names were beneath the bathhouse floor. The sergeant searched Yusuf's face for hesitation. Finding none, he ordered the house sealed and took him outside. Neighbors watched from narrow doorways as Yusuf was marched through the street. The arrest produced the effect the authorities intended. People who had trusted him now understood that any hidden writing could be discovered. Several households began destroying what remained in their homes before the soldiers reached them. Letters were torn apart. Names were scraped from family objects. Fragments were dropped into cooking fires. The state did not need to destroy every record itself. It only needed to create enough fear that the victims completed the work. Zahra was ordered to remain in the house. She waited until evening. Then Captain Varela entered alone. He closed the door behind him and placed Yusuf's damaged prayer book on the table. The Arabic manuscript was no longer inside. Varela did not sit. "Your husband has accepted responsibility." Zahra looked at the cut binding. "He repairs books." "He collected 40 family names." "He repairs many books." Varela allowed the silence to continue. He had no interest in arguing over what had already been found. His purpose was to identify what had not. "The manuscript is a key," he said. Zahra gave no response. "It refers to marks, positions." An order. She understood immediately that someone had translated more of it. Varela moved closer. Where is the record? There is no other record. Then why number the names? Ask my husband. I did. Varela placed one hand on the table. He refused to answer. There was no anger in his voice. That restraint was part of the threat. He spoke as if the outcome had already been decided, and Zahra was being offered a narrow administrative correction. He may still be released, Varela said. Possession of prohibited writing does not always require prolonged detention. The statement was technically possible and practically false. Zahra knew how such bargains worked. An official offered mercy before revealing the price. Once the information was surrendered, the accused remained useful as leverage, witness, or example. What do you want? She asked. The location connected to these names. There is none. Varela studied her hands. The cuts from the stonework had darkened around the knuckles. Dust remained beneath 2 fingernails despite repeated washing. He noticed. Zahra saw him notice. Your hands suggest otherwise, he said. She closed them. Varela did not accuse her directly. He did not need to. Tomorrow, he said, your district will be searched again, more thoroughly. He lifted the prayer book. If the names are found before you cooperate, your husband will no longer be treated as a man who merely preserved writing. The distinction mattered. Possession could be punished. Organization could be treated as resistance. Varela opened the door. Before leaving, he turned back. A person who does not exist in the archive cannot appeal to it, cannot reclaim property from it, cannot prove marriage, inheritance, or birth through it. Zahra remained silent. Varela continued. When these names disappear, no official record will contradict us. That was the clearest statement he had made. The destruction was intentional. The archive was not failing to preserve the community. It was being used to erase it. After nightfall, Zahra left through the rear wall of the house. A neighboring storeroom connected to an alley beyond the soldiers' line of sight. She did not go to the prison. She went to the bathhouse. The decision was severe but rational. Yusuf had already protected the location. Attempting to reach him would only expose both of them. Inside the central chamber, Zahra checked every stone. None had been moved. No fresh marks appeared near the entrance. The 40 names remained hidden. She lifted the final slab and began adding Yusuf's name beneath the others. Not because she had accepted his death, because she no longer trusted that anyone taken into custody would return with an identity intact. At the same hour, Yusuf was questioned in a guard room near the administrative quarter. The translated manuscript lay on the table. A clerk pointed to the numbered sequence. Where? Yusuf gave them an address. An abandoned dye workshop near the eastern wall. It had no connection to Zahra, the bathhouse, or the 40 families. The officers sent a patrol immediately. They searched the building until dawn. They found broken vats, old ash, and nothing else. By giving them a false location, Yusuf gained only a few hours. He knew that. A false answer could not end the investigation. It could only redirect it. But a few hours were enough for Zahra to return the stone, remove the last visible dust, and leave the bathhouse before another patrol entered the quarter. When the soldiers discovered the workshop was empty, Varela did not order Yusuf released. He ordered him questioned again. This time he instructed the guards to ask one name repeatedly. Zahra al-Qurtubi. By the following evening, the Morisco quarter had been sealed. Soldiers closed the northern lane first, then the market passage, then the narrow streets leading toward the old water channels. No one was allowed to leave. No visitor was allowed to enter. Guards stood at every intersection with lanterns and drawn blades. The order came without warning. Households were told to remain inside until called. Then the raids began. This time, the officers were not searching for one hidden manuscript. They were removing the last private traces of an entire community. Doors were opened in sequence. Residents were pulled into the street while clerks entered their homes. Chests were emptied. Mattresses were cut open. Family objects were examined for Arabic lettering. Old marriage contracts, letters, devotional fragments, and handwritten names were seized whether or not the officers could read them. The purpose was no longer investigation. It was collection before destruction. Zahra stood outside her sealed house with the others. A guard kept the residents facing the street while officers moved behind them. Across the lane, an elderly woman tried to keep a folded cloth beneath her sleeve. A soldier noticed. He took the cloth and shook it open. Inside was a narrow strip of paper bearing 6 names. The woman reached for it. The soldier stepped back. "My sisters," she said. No one answered her. The strip was placed in a collection sack. The woman was not arrested. That was not necessary. The state had taken the only thing she had tried to save. Farther down the street, a potter was forced to watch as officers scraped an inscription from the base of a bowl. The writing had been hidden underneath, where it could not be seen during use. The bowl survived. The name did not. This distinction defined the operation. Objects with market value were preserved. Identity was removed. By midnight, the soldiers had filled carts with confiscated material. The residents were driven toward the public square. They arrived in household groups and were arranged behind ropes. Adults who stepped out of line were pushed back. Several people asked where those arrested during the earlier searches had been taken. The guards gave no answer. At the center of the square stood a raised wooden platform. Below it, officers built a wide pile from the contents of the collection sacks. Letters, family histories, marriage records, pages copied by hand and passed through several generations, small pieces of wood bearing names, cloth marked with family symbols, fragments of Arabic writing preserved inside Christian book covers. The pile was not large compared with the number of people gathered around it. That was part of the accusation. Years of restriction had already reduced what remained. The authorities were burning the surviving fraction and preparing to claim there had never been more. Captain Alonso Varela appeared on the platform with 2 clerks. One carried a register, the other held a torch. Varela waited until the square was silent. He announced that prohibited materials had been discovered throughout the district. He described them as evidence of disobedience, concealment, and refusal to abandon unlawful customs. He did not acknowledge that the records concerned births, marriages, ancestry, work, and family memory. To admit that would have exposed the act for what it was. The first clerk began reading. He called out an Arabic name taken from one of the seized pages. The second clerk answered with the Christian name assigned to that person in the official register. The pattern continued. A forbidden name, then its replacement. A family line, then a household number. A woman known privately by the name her mother had given her was reduced to an entry copied by a priest decades earlier. A craftsman whose ancestors had worked in Granada for generations was identified only by the Christian surname imposed upon his father. The ceremony was designed to prove that the archive held greater authority than memory. The crowd was forced to listen. Some residents lowered their heads. Others stared directly at the platform. Zahra watched Varela. He was not observing the firewood. He was observing reactions. Each flinch confirmed that a name still mattered. Each whispered correction revealed that the official record had failed to replace the private one completely. This was not only destruction, it was interrogation conducted against an entire square. The clerk reached the name Yusuf ibn Harun. Zahra did not move. The official replacement followed. Mateo Herrera. Then Varela raised one hand. The reading stopped. 2 guards brought a hooded prisoner onto the platform. His hands were bound. His clothes were stained from confinement. He stood with difficulty and kept his head lowered. Varela faced Zahra. The crowd shifted around her. No one needed to be told whom the prisoner was supposed to represent. "Your husband has been given another opportunity," Varela said. Zahra looked at the hooded man. His height was close to Yusuf's. His shoulders were narrow. One sleeve had been torn near the wrist. The resemblance was sufficient from a distance. Not certain. Sufficient. Varela ordered Zahra forward. A guard opened the rope and led her toward the platform. She stopped several steps below the prisoner. "You know what we require," Varela said. Zahra did not answer. The names in the manuscript were arranged, marked, numbered. The square remained silent. "Tell us where the record is hidden, and Matteo will leave this platform alive." The threat was simple because it did not need elaboration. Zahra studied the prisoner's hands. Yusuf had a burn scar along his left thumb from years of heating binding tools. The hooded man's hands were partly concealed by rope. She could not see the scar. Varela noticed where she was looking and ordered a guard to turn the prisoner toward her. The man lifted his head slightly beneath the cloth. Zahra spoke only once. "Yusuf!" The prisoner remained silent. A guard struck the wooden platform beside him with a staff. He raised his face. Then he moved his head from side to side, slowly. No. The gesture could have meant refusal. It could have meant warning. It could have meant that the man was not Yusuf at all. Zahra had seconds to decide. Varela expected grief to complete what interrogation had failed to do. That was the method. The authorities had already confined Yusuf, threatened him, searched his home, and translated his manuscript. Now they were using Zahra's uncertainty against her. "Where are the names?" Varela asked. Zahra looked at the prisoner, then at the pile below the platform. "They are not mine to surrender." Varela's expression did not change. He nodded to the clerk, holding the torch. The flame was lowered. The first pages caught quickly. Fire moved through dry paper, cloth, and thin wood. The heat pushed the nearest guards backward. Ash lifted above the square and settled on roofs, shoulders, and uncovered heads. The residents watched family evidence collapse into blackened fragments. No one was permitted to turn away. The clerk continued reading names while the records burned. Soon he was announcing identities from pages that no longer existed. The archive was preserving only the versions approved by the state. Zahra remained below the platform. Varela allowed the fire to consume nearly everything before speaking again. "Your silence has achieved nothing," he said. He ordered the hood removed. The prisoner was not Yusuf. He was an older man Zahra had seen once in the holding yard near the district gate. His face was swollen from lack of sleep, but he was alive. He looked at her with shame he did not owe. Varela delivered the rest without emphasis. Yusuf ibn Harun had died during questioning the previous night. The man on the platform had been dressed in his clothing and instructed to remain silent. The offer had never been real. There had been no life left for Zahra to save. The authorities had demanded betrayal in exchange for a dead man. For the first time that night, Zahra lost control of her breathing. She did not cry out. She did not collapse. She stood before Varela and understood the full structure of the crime. They had taken Yusuf's body beyond her reach. They had used his absence as leverage. They had burned the records in public, and they had intended to make Zahra responsible for the final destruction. Varela leaned toward her. "You protected stones instead of your husband." It was the only sentence he spoke with open cruelty. Zahra answered in a low voice. "You killed him before you offered him back." The words carried across the nearest rows. Varela turned away. The distinction mattered, and he knew it. Zahra was returned to the crowd as the last papers collapsed into ash. The residents no longer looked at the fire. They looked at her. Some understood that she had refused to reveal something. Others now feared that her hidden record had caused Yusuf's death. That division served the authorities as effectively as the guards. Before dawn, Varela announced that the district would be cleared the following morning. Families were to carry only what they could hold. Any person absent from the square at first light would be treated as a fugitive. Then he revealed one final fact. The location of Zahra's hidden record was no longer secret. Someone had identified the abandoned bathhouse, someone who knew the family names, someone close enough to know what Yusuf had protected. Varela did not speak the informant's name. He did not need to. At the edge of the square, officers brought forward Zahra's younger brother. Gabriel de Cordoba stood beneath the torchlight with his eyes fixed on the ground. Gabriel did not look at Zahra when the officers brought him forward. That refusal was interpreted immediately. The crowd saw guilt. Zahra saw calculation, but she could not yet determine its purpose. Captain Varela ordered the guards to separate them. Gabriel remained beneath the platform. Zahra was placed near the front of the assembled residents, close enough to hear every word. Varela asked Gabriel to state his official name. Gabriel de Cordoba. Then his family name. Gabriel hesitated. Varela repeated the question. Al-Qurtubi, Gabriel said. The Arabic name moved through the square in a low wave of recognition. For years, Gabriel had worked as a copyist and translator inside Granada's administrative offices. He handled property entries, tax records, confiscation notices, and petitions written by people who could no longer safely use their own language. The work gave him access. It also made him suspect. Some Moriscos believed he had chosen security over loyalty. Others believed he supplied officials with information. He entered government buildings without being searched and returned to the quarter carrying nothing he was willing to discuss. Zahra had defended him when others called him compromised. Now he stood beside the man who had killed her husband. Varela asked whether Zahra had concealed prohibited names. Gabriel answered yes. The crowd reacted at once. A woman behind the rope cursed him under her breath. A former mason moved forward until a guard forced him back. Several people who had trusted Zahra turned their faces away from Gabriel as if recognition itself had become shameful. Varela allowed the anger to build. Informants were most useful when exposed publicly. Once condemned by their own community, they became dependent on the authority that had used them. "Where are the names?" Varela asked. Gabriel described the abandoned bathhouse. He identified the broken service entrance. He explained that the inscriptions had been cut beneath removable floor stones in the central chamber. The details were exact. Zahra understood that he had either entered the hammam or learned the plan from someone who had. She remembered the wet footprint near the old water passage. The unseen observer had been close enough to hear the chisel. Gabriel continued, "There are 40 stones." That number ended any remaining doubt. A guard seized Zahra's arms. She did not resist. Resistance would have turned the accusation into proof before anyone reached the bathhouse. She looked at Gabriel for the first time. He kept his attention on Varela. There was no apology in his face, no signal, nothing Zahra could use. Varela ordered a search party to move immediately. 6 soldiers left the square with iron bars, hammers, lanterns, and shovels. Another group took Zahra toward a holding room near the archive. The crowd watched her go. Several residents called her name, not Isabel. Zahra. The name the authorities had tried to remove was spoken publicly only after she had been accused. That was one of the contradictions of repression. Fear kept identity hidden until loss made silence impossible. Gabriel was not arrested. Instead, Varela placed a hand on his shoulder and led him toward the administrative quarter. The gesture completed the appearance of betrayal. The officers required him to identify the 40 families connected to the stones. To do that, they said, he would need access to the original expulsion register. This was the access Gabriel had been trying to obtain. For months he had copied secondary notices without being permitted to inspect the central list. He had seen fragments, transport numbers, property values, coastal assignments. But the full register remained under lock inside a chamber used by Varela's senior clerks. Only an informant capable of connecting hidden names to official households could justify opening it. Gabriel had understood the condition. To reach the list, he had to become credible to the authorities. To become credible, he had to destroy himself before his own people. The archive occupied a former municipal residence near the center of Granada. Its entrance was guarded. Its inner rooms contained shelves of bound registers, sealed orders, maps, and confiscation inventories. The state treated these papers as neutral records. They were not neutral. They were instruments through which seizure became ownership and expulsion became procedure. Gabriel entered under escort. A clerk searched his sleeves and belt, but not the lining beneath his outer coat. The omission was not accidental. Gabriel had spent years building a reputation for obedience. Familiarity had weakened suspicion. Inside the restricted chamber, the chief clerk placed the expulsion register on a broad table. The volume was heavier than Gabriel expected. Varela stood beside him. "Identify the households." Gabriel opened the cover. The first pages contained official names, baptismal names, house numbers, occupations, and family groupings. Farther inside, the purpose of the register became clearer. Each entry included the property to be confiscated after removal. A weaver's house was assigned to a local creditor. A soap maker's equipment was marked for auction. A workshop belonging to the two divided branches Zahra had recorded beneath one stone had already been promised to a Christian guild member. The removals were not only religious policy, they were organized transfer of wealth. The register also listed which families were considered useful enough to be delayed, which adults might be separated because of specialized trades, and which routes would reduce the risk of escape. The state had measured people by what could be extracted before they were expelled. Gabriel moved slowly through the entries. He named several families correctly. That was necessary. A total refusal would have exposed him immediately. Then he deliberately confused two households with similar Christian surnames. The chief clerk corrected him. Gabriel apologized and asked to compare the older district map kept in the adjoining room. Varela sent the clerk to retrieve it. For the first time, Gabriel was alone with the register. He had less than a minute. He opened his coat and removed a second volume of folded sheets, sewn into a thin leather cover. The forgery had taken months. It copied the handwriting, column widths, abbreviations, and seal placement used by the archive. Gabriel had prepared it by memorizing fragments and copying discarded drafts after hours. The false list contained 40 households, but most did not exist. Some belonged to people who had died years earlier. Others led to abandoned buildings. Several house numbers referred to streets renamed after municipal repairs. 2 families had left Granada before the current order. The document was not designed to survive detailed review. It was designed to survive one night. Gabriel removed the genuine section of the register and inserted the forgery beneath the binding cords. He folded the real pages against his body inside the coat lining. The clerk returned with the map. Gabriel closed the register. His hands remained steady. That control was not evidence of calm. It was evidence of preparation. Varela spread the map across the table. Gabriel began matching false names to false addresses. Each answer sent future patrols toward an empty room, a dead man, or a property that no longer existed. Outside the archive, the search party reached the abandoned hammam. The soldiers entered through the broken doorway and found the central floor intact. They struck the walls first, then the basins, then the blocked water channels. Gabriel had told them where to look, but not how to lift the stones without damaging them. Their iron bars chipped the upper surfaces. One slab cracked at the edge, but did not turn over. The inscriptions remained facing downward. Inside the holding room, Zahra heard the distant impact of metal against stone. Each blow told her that the secret had been exposed. She assumed Gabriel had given the authorities everything. That belief was necessary for his plan to work. Near dawn, Varela approved the revised deployment list based on the forged register. Patrols were assigned to 40 addresses. Transport guards were moved away from the real households. The error would not remain hidden for long, but for several hours the machinery of expulsion had been redirected against empty buildings and the names of the dead. Gabriel left the archive beside Varela. The genuine register was concealed against his ribs. In the street, the first bells of mourning began. By then, 40 families had been condemned by the state, betrayed in public, and accidentally granted the one thing they had not been expected to possess: time. The forged register began to fail before sunrise. The first patrol reached a house that had been empty for 6 years. The second found a locked workshop whose owner was already buried outside the city. A third forced its way into a storage room listed as a family residence and discovered only broken tools and sacks of lime. At first, the officers assumed the residents had fled. Then the contradictions multiplied. One address did not exist. Another belonged to a municipal official. 2 patrols were sent to the same building under different family names. The machinery of removal had been designed to move without hesitation. Gabriel had not stopped it. He had forced it to consume its own errors. Messengers ran between the streets and the archive. Guards were reassigned. Clerks began arguing over house numbers. Captain Varela ordered the district searched without reference to the list, but the confusion had already opened gaps in the cordon. The 40 families moved through those gaps. They did not leave as one group. A mass escape would have been visible before it began. Instead, adults emerged from separate houses in pairs and small clusters. They carried water, bread, blankets, and little else. Property had become a liability. Every object slowed movement. Every bundle invited inspection. The escape routes had been prepared long before the expulsion order, though not for this purpose. Beneath parts of Granada, old drainage channels connected cisterns, ruined bathhouses, workshops, and sections of the former water system. Some passages were blocked. Others remained wide enough for a person to crawl through. Zahra had marked those routes through the order of the floor stones. The symbols around each buried name were not decoration. The open hand marked a low passage that required travelers to move one at a time. The weaving pattern represented a junction where channels crossed. The seed indicated an opening behind a neglected garden wall. The divided line beneath the disputed family name marked the place where the group had to separate. No single person knew the entire route. Each household had been told only which symbol to follow and where to wait for the next guide. That restriction now protected them. If one group were caught, it could not expose the whole escape. The first families entered through a collapsed cellar near the soap maker's house. The second used the rear cistern of an abandoned bakery. A former water carrier led 3 adults through a channel he had not entered in 20 years. He tested the floor with a wooden staff before every step. In 2 places, the stone had given way. They crossed by, pressing their backs against the wall. Above them, soldiers searched empty homes. The contrast was severe. The authorities controlled the streets. The displaced moved beneath them. By mid-morning, more than half the families had passed beyond the sealed quarter. None knew whether Zahra was alive. Most believed Gabriel had betrayed the entire plan. The fact that the patrols were searching the wrong addresses appeared to them as administrative incompetence, not intervention. That misunderstanding was essential. A successful deception could not depend on gratitude. It depended on belief. Inside the holding room near the archive, Zahra heard bells, running boots, and shouted corrections. She could not see the streets, but the disorder was obvious. A guard entered carrying a bowl of water. He was older than the others and wore the insignia of the municipal watch rather than Varela's transport force. He placed the bowl on the floor. Then he closed the door behind him. Zahra waited. The guard looked toward the corridor. "My mother used to know your husband," he said. Zahra did not answer. "He repaired a book for her." The guard removed a small key from his belt. "This room will be inspected when the patrols return." "Why are you telling me?" "Because they are not returning to the right houses." He unlocked the chain around her wrists. The act was controlled, almost mechanical. He did not present himself as a rescuer. He understood that discovery would destroy him. "There is a service passage behind the storage wall," he said. "It opens near the old dye lane." Zahra stood. "My brother?" The guard's expression hardened. "He left the archive with Varela." That answer confirmed what she already believed. Gabriel had traded the 40 families for access and protection. The guard pushed aside a wooden panel and exposed a narrow opening. "Go now." Zahra entered the passage without thanking him. Under such conditions, gratitude could become evidence. The route emerged behind a line of shuttered warehouses. Smoke from the previous night's fire still hung above the quarter. The square was empty, except for guards and the remains of the burned records. Zahra did not return home. She moved toward the bathhouse. Along the way she saw the consequences of the forged register without understanding its source. Soldiers argued outside an abandoned house. A clerk insisted that a family of 6 lived inside. The door had been bricked shut for years. Near the old pottery lane, a patrol questioned a dead man's former neighbor. The officer repeated the Christian name from the false list. The neighbor said the man had died before the current governor took office. The patrol leader accused him of lying. Time was being spent on the dead while the living escaped. Zahra reached the hammam through the rear water passage. The interior had been damaged. One basin was split. Sections of wall plaster had been torn away. Iron marks scarred several floor stones where soldiers had attempted to force them upward, but the central slabs remained in place. Then she heard the chisel. One strike, a pause, another. Zahra entered the main chamber. Gabriel was kneeling beside the final stone. A lamp stood near his left hand. His outer coat had been removed. Dust covered his sleeves. The slab had been lifted and turned over. He was carving Yusuf's name. For several seconds, Zahra said nothing. The image appeared to confirm the worst version of his betrayal. He had led officers to the bathhouse. He had entered the archive. Now he was altering the last stone before the authorities returned. Gabriel heard her step and turned. He did not appear surprised. "You should not be here." Zahra picked up an iron bar left by the search party. "You gave them the entrance." "Yes." "You gave them the number of stones." "Yes." "They killed Yusuf." Gabriel lowered the chisel. "I know." The restraint in his voice made the answer more severe. Zahra moved closer. "You knew where the names were. I watched you enter through the water passage. The footprint. Mine. You let them arrest me. I needed them to believe the accusation. They believed you because you made it true." Gabriel reached inside his discarded coat. Zahra raised the iron bar. He stopped. Then, slowly, he withdrew a folded section of bound pages and placed it on the floor between them. The official seal was visible along the edge. Zahra recognized the format immediately. It was not Yusuf's manuscript. It was larger, arranged in administrative columns and marked with transport codes. "The genuine expulsion register," Gabriel said. Zahra did not lower the bar. He opened the pages. Beside the official names were confiscation orders, property assignments, transport groups, and route instructions. The 40 families had not merely been selected for removal. Their homes and work tools had already been distributed on paper. Every seizure had a future owner. Every expelled household had a beneficiary. This is what they were hiding, Gabriel said. The removal was arranged as theft before they read the order in the square. Zahra looked toward the damaged entrance. And the list they are using? False. Gabriel explained only what was necessary. He had replaced the register with names of the dead, empty properties, and false addresses. The error would last for hours, perhaps less. By midday, Varela would compare the deployment reports and understand that the archive had been compromised. The 40 families were moving through the old channels now. The betrayal in the square had purchased their escape. Zahra looked at the genuine pages. You could have told me. No. You could have told someone. No. Why? Because fear can be imitated. Hatred cannot. Gabriel returned to the stone. They had to see me condemned by our own people. If anyone defended me, Varela would have searched more carefully. Zahra understood the logic. That did not remove the cost. For the plan to succeed, Gabriel's name had to become poisonous. Those who escaped would carry the memory of his betrayal with them. They might never learn that the false list had saved them. History often preserves the visible act and loses the hidden motive. Gabriel placed the genuine register beneath the slab. This must remain with the names, he said. Without it, they may claim the expulsion was disorder. With it, they cannot deny the design. Zahra finally lowered the iron bar. Outside, boots struck the stones of the lane. A command was shouted. Gabriel looked toward the entrance. They found the error. He pushed the register farther beneath the slab and handed Zahra the chisel. Take the water passage. What about you? They must find someone here. No. If they find no one, they will keep searching the channels. The boots moved closer. Gabriel lifted his coat and stepped toward the broken doorway. Zahra turned toward the passage. Then she looked back at the final stone. It remained raised. The register was exposed beneath it. Yusuf's name was unfinished. Gabriel had bought the family's time, but the evidence that could explain his betrayal was still lying open on the floor. Zahra stopped. Then she turned back. Zahra returned to the raised stone. The boots outside were no longer distant. Soldiers had entered the outer chamber. Iron struck broken masonry. Orders moved through the bathhouse in short, controlled bursts. Gabriel stepped toward the doorway to delay them. Zahra caught his sleeve. The stone first. There is no time. There is enough. She knelt beside the exposed register and pushed the genuine pages deeper into the cavity. The document had recorded the theft in exact terms. Homes assigned before their owners were removed. Workshops marked for transfer. Transport routes chosen to prevent escape. If the soldiers found it, Gabriel's deception would be exposed immediately. If the stone remained open, the 40 names would be lost with it. Gabriel returned to the floor. Together they lowered the slab halfway. Zahra stopped before it settled. Yusuf's inscription was unfinished. She lifted the edge again and took the chisel. The first name was completed quickly. Yusuf ibn Harun. No official replacement, no baptismal entry, no household number, only the name he had protected. Zahra added Gabriel's true name beneath it, Hamid al-Qurtubi. Gabriel watched without speaking. The name was dangerous while he lived. It would become necessary if he disappeared. Zahra carved her own name last, Zahra al-Qurtubi. 3 people linked by the same act of preservation. 1 killed during interrogation. 1 condemned as a traitor. 1 marked for removal. The archive would record them differently. The stone would not. Gabriel took the chisel from her and cut a final line beneath his name. Condemned by those he saved. The sentence was not a request for forgiveness. It was an explanation intended for a future audience that might otherwise repeat the accusation. The soldiers entered the adjoining chamber. Gabriel lowered the slab. It did not sit evenly. Stone fragments from the earlier search had lodged beneath one corner. Zahra swept them aside with her bare hand, while Gabriel held the weight. The edge cut into his fingers. He did not release it. The slab settled. The genuine register disappeared beneath the floor. Zahra scattered old dust across the seams. Gabriel kicked broken plaster over the marks left by the chisel. The central chamber now appeared damaged but ordinary. That was enough. Gabriel pointed toward the water passage. "Go." This time Zahra obeyed. She entered the narrow opening behind the collapsed wall and pulled a loose stone across part of the entrance. The passage descended sharply. Water reached her ankles, then her knees. Behind her, soldiers entered the chamber. She continued without turning back. Captain Varela arrived moments later. Gabriel stood alone near the broken basin. Varela looked at the damaged floor, then at the abandoned tools. "You changed the register." Gabriel said nothing. "The addresses were false." No answer. Varela ordered the soldiers to search him. They found stone dust, a cut hand, and nothing else. The genuine pages were already beneath the floor. Varela demanded to know where the 40 families had gone. Gabriel gave him another false route. He claimed they had moved toward the eastern wall. Several patrols were redirected immediately. The real escape continued west through the water channels. Gabriel's final lie bought less than an hour. For the remaining families, it was enough. The last group entered the underground passage, while soldiers searched roads leading in the opposite direction. They moved without lamps through sections where light could escape through drainage openings. A former mason guided them by touch. A soap maker counted intersections. The elderly textile worker carried nothing except the ceramic fragment bearing his family pattern. By midday, the 40 households were no longer inside the sealed quarter. Some reached farms beyond Granada. Others joined transport routes under false names. Several moved south in small groups, never again assembling as one community. They survived by becoming difficult to count. That was the opposite of what the expulsion system required. The authorities depended on fixed lists, visible columns, and controlled destinations. Gabriel had turned their own records against them, creating dead households where living ones had been, and false absences where escape was already underway. Captain Varela understood the deception too late. He ordered the water channels searched. Soldiers entered several passages, but found only abandoned bundles, extinguished lamps, and footprints divided across multiple routes. They arrested Gabriel inside the bathhouse. No public hearing followed. No formal confession was recorded. His name appeared briefly in a detention entry under Gabriel de Córdoba. After that, the archive fell silent. There was no transfer date, no sentence, no confirmed death. The absence was typical of institutions that demanded complete records from the people they persecuted, while allowing their own violence to disappear into administrative gaps. Zahra emerged outside the city through a damaged drainage outlet near an olive grove. She waited until evening before approaching one of the escape groups. The reaction was immediate. They asked about the others. They asked about Yusuf. Then they asked about Gabriel. Zahra told them the false register had been his work. Several refused to believe her. They had heard him denounce the bathhouse in the square. They had watched him stand beside Varela. They had seen Zahra taken away after his accusation. Public betrayal was easier to remember than secret resistance. Some accepted the truth, others carried their hatred into exile. Gabriel had understood that possibility before he acted. He had not designed the plan to protect his reputation. He had designed it to move 40 families beyond the reach of the patrols. The survivors dispersed over the following months. Their Christian names appeared in some port records. Their Muslim names survived unevenly, altered by distance, memory, and fear. Zahra never returned openly to Granada. She carried no copy of the 40 inscriptions. That would have defeated the purpose. The names remained under the abandoned bathhouse floor, beside the genuine register, proving that confiscation had been planned before the expulsion began. For decades, no one disturbed them. The building continued to decay. Part of the roof collapsed. Rain entered the central chamber. The walls lost more of their tilework. Residents nearby treated the site as a ruin with no value. The authorities had searched it for hidden evidence and failed because they looked for documents in walls, containers, and channels. They did not consider the surface beneath their own feet. Years later, an earthquake damaged several old structures in Granada. The bathhouse floor cracked. Workers were sent to remove unstable stone before the building collapsed further. One of them lifted a slab and found Arabic letters carved into the underside. More stones were turned over, then more. 40 family records appeared in sequence: names, parents, former villages, trades, marks representing weaving, masonry, water-carrying, pottery, soap-making, binding, and other work the expelled community had performed inside the city. The inscriptions were not random. When the stones were arranged by their symbols, the pattern formed a map of the old underground channels. The record did not merely identify the displaced, it documented the method of their escape. Beneath the final stone lay damaged pages bearing official seals and confiscation instructions. They showed that property had been allocated before its owners were removed. The expulsion had not been a disorderly reaction. It had been organized dispossession. The last stone held the names of Yusuf, Gabriel, and Zahra. Beneath Gabriel's name was the sentence that corrected the accusation preserved in public memory. Condemned by those he saved. No surviving record proved what happened to him after his arrest. He may have died in detention. He may have been transferred under another name. He may have escaped through the same administrative confusion he created. The archive that renamed his community could not provide a reliable account of his end, but the result of his action remained measurable. 40 households were missing when the deportation columns were assembled. 40 groups of names survived beneath Granada, and the authentic register survived with them. The Crown removed the families from their homes. The officials burned their genealogies. The archive replaced their identities and prepared to distribute their property. Yet beneath the room where Captain Varela declared them erased, the evidence remained intact. They had not disappeared. They had been expelled, renamed, scattered, and deliberately misrecorded. There is a difference. History often loses that difference because the institutions responsible for persecution are allowed to write the final version. Zahra denied them that privilege. She placed the names where official fire could not reach them, and Gabriel sacrificed his own name so the others would have time to carry theirs out of Granada. Subscribe for more forgotten stories of Muslim communities that were conquered, displaced, renamed, and nearly erased from history. Then tell us where you are listening from in the comments and share your theory. Did Gabriel die in custody, escape under another identity, or survive long enough to learn that the 40 families had made it out?